terms that were used, and hopefully when I'm done, anybody that has a glass interest, or even if you don't have a glass interest, you'll be able to look at steins made of that material and dissect it and determine what those techniques were that was used for that particular piece. Okay, we can dim the lights all the way down if you like. We'll start at the beginning, and glass is made basically from sand and from ashes. I'm going to try through the entire lecture not to get overly technical, and I'll try to bring it to the most simplest terms. They take regular sand and ashes from seaweed or the deciduous trees, and it is the ashes that help as a flux to make the whole mixture gel together into a molten mass. You'll see on the screen on the left side, it's an old furnace which hasn't changed today. If you go to Corning to the mini convention, you'll see a very similar apparatus, and you'll see, again, looking on the left, there's little portholes, or what they call the glory hole, where the glass blower will reach into the furnace, and in a ceramic or metal pot, this mixture would be melted down into a glassy, taffy kind of mixture, and he'll reach in there and get a gathering on the end of his blowpipe. If you again look at the left scene, you'll see a guy actually blowing the glass at the end of the blowpipe. It almost looks like he's blowing up a balloon. And in essence, that's pretty much how it works. If he's freehand blowing, it will just expand into a round mass, and as he works it using the tools, he can shape it the way he wants. Okay, now on the right-hand side, you can see the glass blower's bench. He's seated after he's got the glass on the end of the blowpipe, and he'll work it. As you see, these two arms come off of the bench. The reason for those arms is he has to continually spin that rod, so the centrifugal force of spinning it doesn't allow it to collapse. You have to understand that it's in a taffy kind of a texture, and if you ever see them pulling candy, taffy, you can pull it in different directions, but if you keep it still, the thing will just continue to sag. So unless he spins that rod along those arms, the glass will actually collapse. And then you can see the workers down on the bottom of the right-hand screen. Again, he's got to keep reheating the glass. And as he reheats the glass, it allows it to stay at a temperature where it's malleable. He can continue to shape it and form it. If it gets too cool, then he will lose the ability of doing that. Now, you've basically got three different types of making glass. You've got freehand blown, which you see here up on the screen. He's working it by all his hand tools. Then there's mold blown, and then there's pressed. And we'll discuss them for a minute. So you see some of the tools on the right-hand side. Again, you see a better shot of the glass blower's bench with the arms coming off of it. You see some shears and other tools that he uses to cut the glass and shape it. You see the blowpipe and the pontil rod to the left. But what I want you to look at, just below sort of that tub-shaped item, is they're wood molds. Okay? A lot of our glass steins we call that are blown. Okay? And your early 18th century steins are normally freehand blown, where they shaped it to the desired shape that they wanted. But when you got into the 19th century, they would make simple wood molds like this that would give them pretty much the exact shape and size that they wanted, and they could continue just to blow them into these molds and help them make and shape the piece a lot quicker. And later on, about 1840, 1850, it in manufacturing anything, time is money. And whether they're manufacturing aluminum siding or whatever, they're looking to do it as quickly and as cheaply as possible. They want to turn out as much of a product with putting as little time and effort into it, but still keep the quality up. And pressed glass was pretty much developed for that. They could just continue to pour glass into a mold and press it into it and then pump this stuff out very quickly. That would be, if you're judging glass, pressed glass would be the least desirable in my opinion because it had the least amount of workmanship, going up to mold blown and then up to freehand blown being a lot more workmanship. What I want you to look again on the left-hand side, here you see him spinning the glass on the arms of his chair. Now he's pretty much shaped the piece. What he's faced with now is he needs to correct the opening at the top of this piece. This piece looks like a vase, and he'll want to widen the top rim. Well, what he needs to do now is they take a solid metal rod called a pontil rod. That would be put into the furnace, and they'll put a small gathering of glass on the end of it, which will allow the pontil rod to adhere to the bottom of the glass vessel he's working on. What you see is the man on the left, the labeler, he's pushing the pontil rod in the center of the vase. It will immediately attach to the glass piece. Then the man on the right, who's the glass worker, he will then just take a tool and cut just below where his rod is attached to it, and then he'll just bang on the metal rod. And when he bangs on the metal rod, it frees, it breaks the glass pretty much at the top there. Then he'll continue to work the piece, holding it from the pontil rod that the man on the left has. And he'll keep reheating it, and then he'll fire polish the opening. It'll allow him to widen it, shape it, crimp it, put a roll in it, whatever he wants to do to that opening. And the pontil rod allows him to hold the glass and keep reheating it while he's doing that. I remember when I first started collecting, within the first year or two, I think we can all remember back when we knew nothing. And I bought a Biedermeier glass time, and there was this big crack at the very center of the base, and I thought, gee, that's a funny place for damage. And, as you learn, you find out that that wasn't damage. That's where they broke it away from the pontil rod. I've got some pretty good slides of that later on. And this is one of them. Okay, you see that broken area at the center of the glass tine on the underneath portion. And when they're all done completely working the piece, they'll just break it off and then put it in the annealing kiln that allows the glass to come out. One thing you have to remember that at the temperatures that they're working with glass, it needs to cool at a very slow, gradual rate. If you left it in a room when you were done, when it got to a certain temperature, it would just shatter. So it needed to be put into a kiln-like apparatus that was insulated that would allow the temperature to drop at a very slow rate, which didn't allow it to break. Okay, on the right we have a pressed glass tine. And what I want to go through now is show you a very simple way of being able to tell what a pressed glass tine is versus a blown glass tine. Whether it's freehand blown or mold blown, it will have the same kind of handle, but a pressed glass tine will have a different handle. On the left, what you want to see is where the handle is attached to the body. On a pressed glass tine, it was one solid pour. And even though there's a groove where the handle meets the body on the left, if you look, the glass completely flows into one piece. There is no stop point where the handle stops and the body begins, like on a blown piece and with an attached handle. So if you look there, you'll see down the middle of the back of the handle and in the middle of the body in the back of the handle, there will be a seam. But where the actual handle is attached, you'll see that there's no seam at all. It just It's tough to do this photographically, but I think probably the people in the front of the room can see a lot clearer. Okay. Now if you look at the handle on the right, you can see exactly that handle is all one solid piece of glass, and the body is a different piece of glass, and it was attached when it was in a taffy state. So the handle stops and the body begins. If you have long fingernails, you'll be able to actually get them in portions of where it meets up underneath, where you wouldn't be able to do that with the handle on the left. But I got quite a few photos of long handles so you can see the difference. It's easier to see here because you've got a different color body beneath the clear handle. Again on this one too. I pretty much just want to emphasize that for the beginning collector, especially on clear glass, the first, if you're having trouble telling the difference, the easiest thing is just to look where the handle is attached to the body. And that pretty much will start to teach you. This is from the top down photo showing you pretty much where the body ends and the handle begins. Okay. This is just to show you what they're capable of doing. That stem on this goblet could not have been done in a mold. It had to be done completely by hand. You have 3 separate stems that are intertwined, running up, and they're not touching each other except for where they're joined together both beneath the bowl and above the base. You couldn't do that any other way by working it by hand. So that's pretty much just to give you an idea of what you could do with using the tools that I showed you previously. Okay, what I want to go through now is when glass is made using the sand and the ashes, without doing anything else to the glass, everybody can remember years ago and even today, a Coke bottle, the old Coke bottle green. That kind of light green color is the color of glass naturally when it's made. There's impurities and iron in the glass, in the ingredients of the glass, that shades the actual glass that color. And what they need to do is they need to counteract that green color with a violet shade to bring it back to clear. And the way they do that is putting a material that has an oxide that gives off a violet shade, and it will counteract the green shade and bring it back to 0 or clear. And that material, the glass bowl, is called a glass blower's soap to clean the glass or to clear the glass. Well, when they learned how to do that to bring it back to clear, then they found that by adding other oxides, they could then give the glass a continual color without taking away its transparency. You still could see through it, but yet it would have a nice, consistent overall color, like the piece on the left. A nice ruby color that's throughout. If you broke the piece, it's not stained, it's not overlaid, and that color goes completely through the piece. And you could get pretty much any color that you wanted. You've seen greens and ambers and rubies and cobalt, amethyst, and there was very little limitation of getting a shade or a color that they wanted. Here you got a uranium green, and by putting real uranium into the mix, you would get either a yellowish or yellowish green color, and it was almost like a fluorescent color. It would just light up and pull the light into it, almost like a fluorescent bulb. Tough to see from a photo, but if you've seen uranium glass or what Americans call Vaseline glass, you know what I mean. This is a wonderful Pokal that's in the yellow uranium glass. Real fantastic cut work on I think in this shot you can see what I mean. It just illuminates on its own. Incidentally, the glass blowers' average age of life expectancy was about 28 years old. And a lot of it had to do with the materials that they were putting in the glass, like arsenic and uranium, and even some more deadly oxides and things like that. They didn't have anybody that understood what it was doing to their bodies, and so they really didn't live very long. On the right, you see a nice cobalt stein with a nice consistent color going throughout. Okay, there's three different types of glasses when you get into color. There's transparent glass, there's translucent glass, and there's opaque glass. The difference between the three is your transparent glass will have a consistent color throughout, like the previous pieces I've shown. But yet, if you put your hand on the other side of it, you'd be able to see through it and see your hand. Translucent are your opalines, which will then let light pass through it, but you'd have a tough time seeing your hand on the other side. Then your opaque glass is a very dense glass, like the piece on the left, which doesn't let, it does let light through it, but you'd have to get a very strong, intense light to be able to see it. And then there's others that do not let any light pass through it at all, and it almost appears to be like a ceramic. So those are your three classifications of color glass. The one on the left now is an opaline. And the opaline gives it a very milky kind of a color, tough to see through, but a nice murky, milky kind of a color. The things that they put into the glass to get that kind of texture was bone ash, very similar to what they put into the production of making porcelain. Over many years, I think one of the most common questions I've been asked about glass is, what's the difference between opaline and milk glass? When they look at steins like the one I have on the screen on the left, they'll say, is that milk glass or opaline? The difference is, first to get milk glass, what they put into it is tin oxide. Anybody that has a faience knows that a faience stein's white opaque glaze is made from the tin oxide. Well, they found that by putting the same tin oxide into the glass mix, it gave the glass a very dense opaque white color. And their purpose for doing that is they wanted to make the glass appear to be porcelain. At the time when porcelain was in high demand, it was a way of the glass blowers capitalizing on the demand for porcelain, but using their material. You can see the opaline on the right. That's another uranium piece on the right. The uranium glass will also be transparent, but again, it will just sort of illuminate, and the texture when you feel it almost has a greasy feeling, or a wet feeling. And anybody that's ever held one of these pieces knows what I mean. It just feels slimy, even though it's not. And the piece on the right is an opal glass. They made a whole series of glasses that appear to be made from stone. Your licheline, your iolite, your opal glass, all were very, very dense and opaque, and gave you the appearance of something that was made from stone. That was their intention. This is the licheline. The licheline, if anybody has ever eaten a marble cake, you know that when you cut through it, it has a grain that kind of ran through it. They found out by making the licheline glass that when they cut it and ground it and polished it, it exposed these grains and made the piece look like marble. A very, very sought after kind of glass, and it's quite expensive. Okay, now I want to go into overlays, other ways of coloring the glass different than we spoke of so far. A couple terms that we've in properly used, and hopefully today I'll clear them up and hopefully you'll understand the difference. Cased glass, overlay, and flashed. They've been, for the most part, used erroneously. Let me start with flashed. A lot of us will look at a ruby stained stein that maybe has a sparse on it, and we'll say, well, I got a ruby flashed stein. There was a couple in the auction on Wednesday, and they were labeled as ruby flashed. Flashed glass is overlay for this. It's the same thing. An overlay stein is a flashed stein. And then what happened when they made the glass, they started out at the end of the blowpipe, they got their gathering of clear glass, or whatever the first layer would be, and then they took that ball of glass and inserted it into another pot in the furnace of a different color glass, and a layer was created over the initial layer. And you could do that as many times as you want. You could then go to another pot. You could have clear to red to pink to blue to amethyst, as many times as you want to do it, and you would keep putting a consistent layer on top of what you already had. So that is flashed, and overlay means the same thing. Cased glass is different. Now the process that I just explained for overlay is different. Now, what they would do is the glass blower would start with a ball of glass on the end of the blowpipe. He would blow it up a little bit. He would then cut the blowpipe from the piece, leaving like if you took a cup and removed the handle, that would be the shape that he had. He'd set it in a holder. He would then get another blowpipe with another layer of glass, and he would blow it inside of this cup shape that you already had in glass. And the way you can tell the difference is both layers of glass should be exactly the same thickness. It's very, very thick. The outer layer and the inner layer are the exact same thickness and very thick. A overlay piece will have the first or second or third layers will never be as thick as the initial starting layer. So that's how you can tell. I've never personally seen a cased glass stein. Technically, if you want to be technical, I've never seen a stein that has really been done in the cased fashion. You usually see vases and things like that. Now that doesn't say it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen one yet. Now on the left we've got just a simple blue over clear case. And on the right we've got pink over white over clear. Okay. Now the one on the left appears to be a white overlay stein. In fact, it's not. There's one other way of making the piece appear to be an overlay besides staining that you have to be on guard for, because it shouldn't bring as much money. This white layer that's on this piece is white enamel, and then it's wheel cut through just like you would do on an overlay. Now, I don't have a good photo to show you how to tell, but I'm going to explain it to you. The body has to be made, and then the handle is put on. All right? Well, you can't put the enamel on the entire body and then attach the handle. So beneath the handle, if you look at the handle, there'll be no white beneath the handle in the body where the handle was applied. So if you want to be able to tell if that was a true overlay and the handle was clear, when you look through where the handle was attached, you'd find white glass. If it's an enamel overlay, when you look where the handle was attached to the body, you would find clear glass. They actually had to paint the enamel around the handle attachments. That is an ironclad way of being sure whether it's an enameled overlay or a glass overlay. Very important because the price changed dramatically. Okay, now we're going to talk about stained glass. Stained glass goes back to in Europe to the 14th and 15th century. Most of your church cathedrals had windows that were stained glass. The piece on the left, which a lot of times, this is the kind of piece I was talking about, that we would say, I've got a ruby flashed stein. That is not a ruby flash stein. It's a ruby stained stein. Okay? It's a metallic oxide that was painted onto the clear body to give it a ruby, color, nice consistent color, and then it was cut through. But it's a stain that was applied by a brush. Now, stain consisted of metallic oxide and oil and painted onto the body in deference to enamel, which was ground frit, frit is already made glass ground into a powder with an oil base added to give it as a medium for painting, and then the metallic oxide that you wanted to derive the color that was needed, then it would be painted on. That's enamel. So there's a difference between stain and enamel. Enamel actually is glass, whereas stain is just an oxide and a coloring agent. The piece on the right is an amber stained piece that's been wheel cut. Again, my main purpose is that we would learn the terms, not so much just to be knowledgeable and know the terms. It's important if you're a glass buyer to understand one real important principle. If you're buying a piece and it starts to get expensive, you need to know the techniques that it took to make it for one real important reason. The more elaborate the techniques, the difficulty factor of the technique will tell you how expensive the piece should be. An overlay is certainly more expensive than a stained piece. And if you're going to chase something for a couple, $3,000, $4,000 and it's a stained piece, unless there's something very unusual about it, you're overpaying. But yet if it's a single, double, triple overlay, you're getting well worth your money. So it's important to know how the stein was made and the techniques involved and the difficulty factor. Here on the left we've got a beaker that again is like the one stein on the right. It's an amber stain. It's been wheel cut through. The one on the right here is pretty interesting. A lot of times, and most times, you'll see them stain the body on the outside and then wheel cut through. The cranberry beaker on the right was stained on the interior of the goblet and then cut through. And if you look down where the body meets the foot of the piece, you'll see the clear portions extending from the body. And the interior is giving off the cranberry color. It's kind of a unique looking piece. Now somebody unknowledgeable would say, oh, I've got a cased glass beaker, that it's clear glass over cranberry, but it is in fact a cranberry stain on the inside, and it's just they took a regular clear goblet, stained the interior, and got a whole different effect. And I will also say that sometimes I have to really look to be sure what the technique is, because the one on the right will give an appearance of a much more elaborate piece than it is. It is a gorgeous looking piece, but it didn't take a very difficult technique that it appears that it did. Okay, as I was talking before about enamel, enamel very rarely will wear or chip off of a glass. And the reason being is that the enamel is glass. Just to go over what I said previously, because it's very important to understand, they took already made glass and ground it into a powder, added the metallic oxide to get whatever color they wanted. If they wanted a white, they put tin oxide in it, and then they added an oil, so it was a medium for painting. And when it was then reheated on the glass body, it fused itself to the glass body. It became part of it. Glass attaches to glass, and you would have to take it off with a grinder. You can't scrape it off. You would actually have to grind it off. It just makes a fusion between those two bodies because they're the same kind of material. So it's not paint. Enamel is not paint. Enamel is technically glass. Very important point to understand. And here we have another beaker with a similar kind of heraldic crest, again with enamel. Now when we get into enamels, we again have more categories. Like we got into glass in color. There was a transparent, translucent, and opaque. In enamels, you've got opaque enamel and you've got transparent enamel. Again, getting into how to dissect a piece for value, most enamel is opaque, does not let the light through. It was meant to completely cover the surface and not let light pass through it. Transparent enamel is almost like a stain. The difference is it's not just an oxide and oil, it has some frit involved in it, so it's more of a glass than it is an oxide, and it doesn't wear as easily. And transparent enamel you see less often than opaque enamel, so that factor makes transparent enamel more expensive than opaque enamel. Now, the piece on the left is just interesting because they painted both the outside and the inside of the piece. Very similar to what they did on the wedding glass steins, which is erroneously called Biedermeier steins, because there is no such thing as a Biedermeier stein. There's a Biedermeier period, but they're more marriage steins. And here you can see a close-up of the enamel. And you can see the brush strokes and everything in the enamel. But on the panels on the right photo, the white behind the paint is on the inside of the piece. So it's double wall painting. Just to show you the kind of quality of enamel you can get. This is part of a set that I have that was made for one of the Slavic countries. And I've got the picture and 6 speakers showing the electors and the royal ruling family. It's absolutely a fantastic piece. But I want you to concentrate on the face, the close-up on the right. It's like a painting. There's shading. It's not just broad strokes and bold, like, color by number. This is a very fine portrait. And again, when you're analyzing a piece, and if you're buying an enamel piece, there's good enamel and there's bad enamel. And the way you can tell the difference is in the quality. What kind of detail is there? And so, as a buyer, you want to know the factors that are involved when you're paying for it. And it's like anything else. The better quality, the more expensive. The poorer the quality, the less amount of money you should spend. So you need to learn how to analyze. Here's one of my favorite pieces. It's a white overlay, and then it's enameled on the white overlay. It's cut through, and then you've got a town scene in the center of it. And you have to understand that even with this photo, it's tough to see. See a little coach going across the city square? That can't be more than a 1/16 of an inch high. And it's very, very delicately painted, and that's what you're paying for. The average enameler couldn't do that, so you had a talented man doing it, which subsequently makes the piece a little harder to come by and more expensive. A type of enameling that goes back to the 16th century is what they call Spätzle, which simply means black enamel. And this is a Lobmeyer decanter. And I just included this to show you something that they did from the past that they revived during the Hysterismus period. And for those of you that have never heard that time, Hysterismus just means the historical period or the second revival, and that was from like 1860 to 1900 when they started redoing all the glass, all the pewter and the faience, all the arts from the Renaissance period. That's the period you have to be very careful because there's some very good 19th century reproductions of things done earlier. So you have to learn the differences between them because some of them were real close. If you're buying a 17th century piece versus a 19th century piece and they look exactly the same or they're the same quality, you will pay a lot more for something that's 17th century and that's 19th century, even though they're equal in quality and workmanship. So you really need to know the period. Here again, this is a Mosher piece, and the enamel on this also is very, very finely done. And I just want to show this as an example of what they were able to do. If you look at the face, the lips, the eyes, the shading of the cheeks, this took a lot of handwork. It's not a transfer. It's not a highlighted transfer. This is all done by hand. And here's another that was available. Okay, we talked about the opaque enamel, and now we're going to go through some transparent enamel. The piece on the right is a mold piece, and he was from Dresden, and he predominantly worked at transparent enamels on beakers. Beakers like that start at 5,000 and get up to 30,000, and they're only about 4 inches high. But it's very fine, detailed, transparent enamel. The piece on the left is Anton Kutgaster, and he was from Vienna, and he did many, many Vienna scenes and Germanic scenes. For the most part, they were town souvenir beakers, and again, they also get very expensive. Now, the one on the right, Moen predominantly worked in a transfer that was filled in, where Kutgaster completely hand-painted most of his work. But nevertheless, they both get extremely expensive. This sign should be familiar to most of you that were paying attention to the glass in Gary's auction. I also have that sign. This is a transparent piece, very well shaped, and held up to the light. All the enamel will let the light pass through like a stained glass window. Very hard to find on signs, and as you've seen, got kind of expensive in the auction, but rightfully so. Here's two goblets by Fritz Heckert, and these also, when you hold them up to the light, they'll allow the light to pass through, and they look like little stained glass panels. And all things being even, if you have the same quality enamel goblet in opaque enamels versus transparent enamel, you'll pay more for the transparent enamel every time. Here's a really fantastic stained stein. Okay, there is a big difference between stained and transparent enamel, and it takes time to tell the difference. But here you've got an amber stain on the body, and then they scratch back through to put some detail in the floral and through the stained areas. But not to be confused with transparent enamel. Staining, again, I hate to be repetitive, but that's how you learn. Staining is strictly an oxide mixed with oil applied to the body, where transparent enamel is the frit, the enamel, the oxide and the oil. The difference between them is the transparent enamel has the glass or the frit, and the staining does not. Here you get a piece on the right. It's Hyalite glass, very opaque, dark black, with gold work on it. And the real reason I have it up there is not so much for the glass, but to show you another way of decorating was gelding. Gelding was another form of enamel, but it was different than any other enamel. It was actually a gold leaf that was painted over with an oil. It's a metallic oxide in oil. Only difference is it's not transparent. When it burns to its color, it's opaque. It takes on a gold form. And the beaker on the left has enamel along with gold. Now, when they fired the enamel on, it was fired on a much higher temperature. To put gold on, they then had to put it on and fire it at a lower temperature because it was burned off at the same temperature as the enamel. So after this piece was made, ground, polished, and everything else, it went through the kiln 2 other times to have the enamel and the gold put on. Here's an opaline beaker, again with multicolored enamel and gold fired on. Same as the other one. It was through the kiln 2 times to have the enamel on. Here you've got a ruby glass stein that has been dressed up with gold going down the crevices of the columns, a little floral pattern on the top. Gold can be actually worn off by the acid in your skin. It's not wise if you've got glass piece with a lot of gold to handle it too much or wash it too much. Best to wash it once and dust it the rest of the time, because you will start to take the gold off very easily. And once the gold has wear on it, the piece really becomes ugly. At least to me. You really want to see most of the gold there. And it's the same thing with anything, any stein that has gold on it. You like to see it all in place. That's a close-up of the previous speaker showing the enamel of the gold. Okay, another way of embellishing the items was by adding other additional glass to the body. You've got fronts, regal work, threading. All was added to the glass body to give it more definition, more color. You see on the master glass stein on the left, a nice big front on the neck of the body. And on the goblet to the right, you've got a series of 4 fronts going around the knob of the stem. Okay, on the piece to the left is a Mosher goblet, and there's a close-up. This will show you the regal work. Regal work was like a skirting that went around, or a belly band that was attached with that sort of ruffle to it. So that has that. It also has the fronts, and it also has glass beads. So there's an awful lot of glass attached to this stem that really enhances the appearance. Okay, the next thing I wanted to talk about is cutting the glass, changing the shape after you've gotten it out of either mold or freehand blown. The scene on the left is showing a man at the spindle apparatus putting the cuts. You've got cut glass, you've got real cut, you've got intaglio, and you've got cameo. They're all different. And hopefully, when I'm done, you'll understand the difference. The piece on the right is a cut glass goblet. Cut glass has facets and cuts in it to make the piece look prism-like or to make it glisten like a diamond. There's a lot of similarities. You could take the best diamond in the world, the biggest and the best, but until you put your cuts and facets, it looks like a marble. And you don't ever see a woman wearing a big marble around the finger because it's ugly. And you can also take a real good quality diamond and put a crappy cut into it, and it doesn't look good. So more important than the quality of the diamond is the way that it's cut. And it's the same way with glass. There are some glass collectors here in the audience that I know of that collect cut glass. And they'll tell you that the cut and the design of the cut is very important to the value. How intense and how busy and the quality and the depth determine the value. Now, what they did to do cut glass, the cutter would probably have 100 different size and shape wheels. The bigger the wheel, the bigger the cut. The smaller the wheel, the smaller the cut. Then you've got the profile of the wheel. If you were to put the wheel on a side and look across its surface, if it were flat, you're going to put a flat cut into something. If it's rounded, you're going to put an indented cut in. If it's a diamond shape coming into the face of the profile, then you're going to put a ridge cut. All of these things would change the kind of cut that you're going to make. And a man could work on one piece for days and weeks and months, depending upon how intricate a pattern he wanted to put in. Now you also have to understand that after it was done putting the cuts in, it didn't look like the piece on the right. Every time you cut through the glass, you leave a very rough surface, and now the piece is going to have a very frosted look, or like a sandblasted look. So after he's done putting all the cuts in, and he's very happy with what he's done, he now has to polish the surface. So the piece will let the light pass through again and not throw it back off at you. And that's called light refraction. Here you've got a glass line on the left that's got some real nice cuts and facets to it. This is the base to the goblet that was just on the right screen. You know, this is just the very bottom of it, and look at the intensity of the cuts and the facets. Very typical what the Bohemians did on the bottom of glass lines. They would put a fantastic design on the body, and they would continue the intricacy of that pattern, or even a different pattern to the body, and really dress up the foot of it, which you most times don't even see. Again, another example of a cut glass line. Another question that I'm asked very often by both the beginning collector and the advanced collector is, if I were to be investing in signs of different categories today, where do I think the good purchase prices are that will have advancement in price in the future? I will tell you that good quality, clear, long cut glass lines are being given away for nothing. I've been buying them for a long time. And that is an area that will have a marked improvement as the collectors begin to be able to tell the difference in judging the quality. The piece on the left I bought for $100. And besides having great cuts and facets, it's got magnificent pewter work and hinge skirts and everything else. If you like glass and you like clear glass, you can still today buy real good quality, clear, long glass lines for very little money, and it's a good place for a beginning collector to start. Here is just a close-up showing the different small cuts, big cuts, grooves, columns on one piece. You have to understand that he didn't do this in 10 minutes. He probably worked on this thing most of the day. And then, like I said, it had to go to the polisher, and the polisher worked on it quite a while too. Now polishing, take a moment to discuss how that was done. They would buff it down with wheels and cork with a larger abrasive, and then continually use smaller abrasive liquids until they got into the fine polish. Another way of doing it is they used hydrofluoric acid, which helped them bring the surface to a nice, shiny, smooth texture surface. The polisher was a very important man in the glass factory because he could take a wonderfully cut piece and louse it up by not doing his job properly or thoroughly enough. On the right is one of my favorite clear glass tines. Real heavy, protruding facets and cuts. About an 1830 piece. Real strong Biedermeier influence with a hand-painted clear glass inlay. Now, just go off on the side a little bit, what they could do with enamel. That insert, even though it looks like porcelain or opaline, was clear glass that was enameled from the underside to give it a whitish look, and then transparent enamel painted from the top to give it depth. And fantastic quality. Now I bought that for the equivalent of about $300, and I wouldn't sell it for $1,500. Well, I wouldn't sell it for any price, but I mean, it's worth that or more. So it just shows you there's really good bargains out there. Okay, another way of working the surface outside of what we've already talked about, grinding and cutting for cut glass, was what they did in the earlier period, and I feel I've got to mention it even though they didn't use it in the 19th century. It's called diamond cutting or diamond scratching. The item on the left has linear lines scratched into the surface. They're just surface scratch lines giving you a scene. And they would take either a sharp metal object or a diamond object, and they would cut just a line pattern into the surface of the piece. Now, the item to the right, they actually, if you think of printing and dot matrix, for those of you that have some printing knowledge, if you're going to take a series of dots, say you took a piece of paper and you folded it in half, and on the right side of the paper, you put 1,000 dots spaced evenly, And on the left side of the paper, you put 5,000 dots spaced evenly. Even though the piece of paper was white with black dots, the 5,000 spaced dots to the left, or tighter grouped, will make the paper look darker, and the surface of the glass, and that's wheel cutting. Okay. Now, a lot of people use the term intaglio and wheel cutting interchangeably. They're not the same. Wheel cutting simply is like the diamond cutting, only it's a little deeper, but it's a surface cut. You usually see spa beakers and building scenes like that. There's not a tremendous amount of depth to the cutting, and it was done with a copper disc. The man on the left is spinning a copper disc, and he's cutting into the surface of the glass. Now, the cutting isn't being done by the copper disc. It's being done by the abrasive liquid that's being dripped onto the copper disc, and the abrasive material is getting between the copper disc and the glass, and it's cutting. It's important to note that the artist, the glass artist, once they start dripping this material on the copper disc, it slobbered up the piece. So wheel cutting, for the most part, was done by the sense of touch, because he lost most of his vision in working with the piece because it got all dirtied up by this cloudy liquid. It was one of the hardest ways of working, and if you're going to judge quality in wheel cutting, a greatly detailed piece, and you're going to see some as we go on, is worth a lot more than a simplistic, stylized cut that maybe an apprentice may do. Both of these pieces we just had on the right are just simple town and building scenes that are wheel cut. Okay, this is a piece of mine that I'm real fond of, and I just want to show you. On the right screen, you'll see a little coach, a wagon and a coach. I'd like you to concentrate on that to show you what can be done. Okay, now that coach is no bigger than about 1/8 of an inch. And, you know, it gives a great effect when you look at it and you reduce it down. That is very, very hard to do. But more importantly, you see how all the engraving on there is very surface oriented. It's not deep. This is true wheel cutting, not intaglio. Okay, just to show you another odd thing they did. The beaker on the left, the goblet on the left, is one of my Nicholas II Russian goblets. And if Jim Hansen's in here, I'm sure he'd appreciate looking at this. Real nice eagle. What they did is they wheel cut the eagle and the crown, and there's some more initials and things in the rear. And then into the cutting, they put black enamel and gold enamel. So just showing you that along with wheel cutting it, they could put enamel into the cutting to give it a different appearance. Now, here is another one of my favorite pieces to show you the quality that you can get. You've got, I think, 5 or 6 cherubs riding a Bengal tiger. I want you to see the quality. Look at the faces on the right of the cherubs. It's just phenomenal quality cutting. Whoever did this was a master and had been at it a long time. This is top quality cutting. Here's just another scene on the right of a couple of the other cherubs. Now here you've got a amber stain piece that has cutting through the stain. This is what is commonly called cut to clear. Okay, but it's not an overlay. It's a stained amber that's been wheel cut through. Again, a good example of wheel cutting. As you see, the wheel cutting is just a surface cut with not tremendous depth to it. Okay, I've been leading up to intaglio. Now the goblet, or the pocale on the left, with the close-up on the right, I want you to look at the left side of the close-up. You see how deeply cut into the body the cutting is. As you get to the bottom portion of the bowl, it's back maybe an eighth to a quarter of an inch into the body. Now, true intaglio cut glass is stone wheel cut back. They will take the main portions of the body, like the stags or trees, and they'll cut way back into the body, and then they'll put the detail in with a wheel cut. So it's a combination of stone wheel grinding depth to the cut, and then putting your detail in with wheel cut. You can't put detail into a piece with the big stone cutting wheels, but you can put depth into the cutting very quickly. And then he'll dress it up with the wheel cut. And that's what intaglio is. So even though you can have wheel cutting in intaglio, wheel cutting isn't necessarily intaglio. You have to have a combination of the two cutting techniques. Here's another one of my favorite pieces. This is a piece by a very famous wheel cutter by the name of Carl Fohl. You've got two leaping horses. This is a blue overlay that's been intaglio cut back. Really a gorgeous piece. Again, as if you're inclined to collect that type of glass with that kind of quality cutting, you get real excited when you find a piece that you can count the hairs on the mane of the horse, and everything else about his organs are anatomically correct. It's just fantastic work. One other thing that they did to change the appearance is a little bit more difficult to see on this piece, and I've got one coming further, but I'll start pointing it out. When they wheel cut or intaglio cut into the surface, either one, it left the surface of the cut itself frosted, because they put a lot of very, very slight lines and grooves into the glass, so it has a very rough texture which bounces the light back and doesn't let as much light pass through. You don't have the same light refraction. Well, if you look on the close-up to the right, and the upper portion of the bowl, you'll see round circles or dots that have been polished. Another way of giving contrast is have most of the cut left rough and other cuts polished out to give it a real balancing back of color. Here's another distinct technique that they did. And again, a lot of these things are not as quickly apparent when you see the piece. You need to sit down and study it. This piece was blown into shape. And then when he was content with the color, the shape that he had, he would then dip the entire piece into acid. And the acid pitted the surface and gave it a very rough texture overall. Then he put a ruby stain onto the piece and fired it. And then, if you look at the close-up, his legs and the shading was needle scratched back through the stain. Just scratching through the stain to allow the clear section to come back through. Now, because the entire body was acid cut, when they put the ruby stain on, the ruby stain also will have a matte finish to it, in deference to if it was on a shiny piece of glass, a very shiny texture. So this whole piece takes on a whole different appearance. And what they were trying to do here is an early piece, it's about 1860. So it's a very early technique used at a time period when they weren't doing it. But they wanted to make it look like cameo glass, which you'll see what I mean when we get to a few other pictures. But just a rare technique. Okay, the goblet on the left I've thrown in just to show you the gold area has been acid cut. Okay, another technique. How did they do it? They would determine on the piece what portion of the section they wanted to put a design on, and then the rest of the piece would be coated with a wax or a grease and let it get hard, and then they would dip the piece into acid. And the only section that was cut and recessed back by the acid would be the protection, the part that was not protected by the wax or the grease. And you could put a pattern. You'd almost put like a stencil around the piece, and you would then leave whatever air open that you wanted, and take the acid, and you protect the rest with the grease. On this, they did that around that band, and then that whole band area, they gilded it, which gives it a whole different contrast with the blue. But again, another thing that they did that was quite interesting. You can see in the close-up what I mean. The areas that were raised in the gold area were protected. The recessed areas were left void of wax, so the acid cut down deep. Now the acid would cut to the depth you wanted by the length of time you left it. The longer you left it in the vat of acid, the more it would cut. If you just wanted a very shallow cut, you leave it in there for a very little period of time. And then you would just neutralize the acid and clean it up and do what you wanted. Another way of embellishing was pewter overlay. You could start out with clear glass, colored glass, but then another way of giving it an entire different appearance would be putting a relief cage work of pewter over the surface. It created a whole different effect, and it was a nice marriage of pewter and glass. Okay, now we're getting into the last category of cutting the surface, called cameo. The difference between this and intaglio and wheel cut is simply that the subject matter was left in the overlay. This is a ruby overlay piece. The horse is left to be in the ruby overlay, and the entire background was cut back away. Now, in the horse area, they would cut to different depths. If they went halfway through just the ruby, it would give it more of a milky, give it more of a pink color held to the light, in deference to an area where they didn't cut at all, which would give it a more redder color, and then where they went through all the way and gave it clear. And you had different degrees of cutting through the red, which would give you different shadings of red. You'd have, so it took more light to go through an area, which would make it darker, and when it was very thin, it took less light and it would make it lighter. And that's the most desirable kind of cutting you can find on our type of glass items, and it's Bohemian Cameo. Here we've got a nice ewer, and I angled the light on the flash in the close-up to show you. You can see the grooves and the facets. It's almost like how lithophane are done. The thicker the area of the porcelain, the darker the scene. The thinner the area of the porcelain, the lighter the scene, giving you an image. Well, this could be sculptured to give you an image, and then they could cut it to even more amplify the image that they wanted to do. Here we've got a couple beakers that I really love. Unfortunately, it's the type of thing that photographically you can't appreciate how great quality these are. These things are as fine as you can get. I've never seen any other cameo that can surpass the quality of the cutting of these two pieces. This is an Austrian general and his wife. They're absolutely top of the line. And anybody that wants to get a much closer look, come to New York. You can sit down at my table, you can handle these things, and really appreciate the work that's involved. There was probably only between 6 and 12 cutters throughout all of Bohemia that could do this quality of cut work. Now there's a lot of Bohemian quality, there's a lot of Bohemian cameo glass, but very little to this degree of quality. Everything else falls far short. Here's an example. Okay, this looks very good. It's a piece that I like, but you can't compare the quality of this piece to the preceding one. If you look at the Horn of Plenty to the right I mean, it looks nice, but you see that the quality of the detail is not there in comparison to the other piece. Subsequently, when you've got the quality of the previous piece, it gets extremely expensive. And I underline extremely. Here we've got a double overlay Bohemian Cameo, which is very hard to find. As hard as it is to do a Bohemian Cameo cut in a single overlay, it is 10 times more difficult to do it in a double overlay. It's hard, it's easy to see that you're getting through what depth you're getting through the upper layer coating of glass, but when you've got an opaque white underneath the blue, it makes it much tougher. You know you're through it when you're through it, so you really have to be experienced to work in that kind of medium. This piece here is interesting because there's a variety of techniques on it that you don't see right away, but as you examine it, you can see. The cross flags and eagle and implements to the left in the left photo is copper wheel cut through our ruby overlay. The leaf scenes on the left are a cameo cut, and the acorns that come out of the cameo leaves, the upper portion of the acorn has been polished clear, where the bottom portion has been left rough like the rest of the cut work around the leaves. Very interesting. You can see it again on this. Just for a typical beaker, there's an awful lot of techniques in this. And again, what I was trying to stress before is you can view the value of a piece by the amount of work that went into it. If it took a lot of work and the degree of difficulty factor was high, it will be a more expensive piece. And you'll appreciate it more because you'll know it took somebody a lot of time and talent to do it. Here we've got a double overlay. And for those of you that have Gary Kersner's The Stein book with a white cover, you'll see a similar piece on the cover. Just a gorgeous piece. I don't think much needs to be said. It does it visually. Okay, basically now I've gone through the techniques. I've got a series of 4 slides, and what I want to do is as I put them up on the screen, I'm going to dissect them and tell you the techniques that were used to make it, to kind of drive home what I've discussed so far. On the left, we've got a overlay glass Stein, clear over white, that's been stone wheel cut, ground, and faceted, polished, enameled. By doing this, you'll see the difficulty factor. The longer I describe a piece, you'll see that it's a lot more time to make it. Here you've got a colored glass Stein, mold blown, opaque enameled, pewter embellished. On the right, we've got an opaline stone wheel, ground and faceted, polished, enameled, and gilded. We've got a ruby stained, mold blown piece, intaglio cut. We've got a green colored, mold blown glass Stein with opaque enamel. We've got a uranium mold blown glass piece, stone wheel ground and polished and faceted, ruby stained, needle scratched. We've got an amber stained, mold blown, intaglio cut. We've got a green colored, mold blown, it's like tongue twisters, opaque enamel. We've got a ruby overlay, mold blown, intaglio cut. We've got, I believe, if I get the color wrong from back here, forgive me, because I don't see as well from the back of the room as you do. I believe that to be a double overlay, panel, wheel cut, polished, enameled, and gilded. embellished well with fantastic mounts. And everybody's saying, where do we find these? This is kind of an interesting piece because opaline and milk glass are distinctly different. This is really not an opaline. The reason it has more translucency, it's a milk glass, believe it or not, that had very little tin oxide put into it, which makes it look very milky and opaline-y, but it's not. It's kind of an odd piece. Mold blown, done in the hysterismus fashion of a 17th century piece, opaque enameled. Real nice. Here we've got a mold blown addition of bronze to the body, pewter embellished. Double overlay, stone wheel ground, cut, polished. Here we've got an intensely cut glass polished piece. Just fantastic. One of a kind. That's the kind of stuff you like to put on the shelf because you won't see it anyplace else. Here we've got a white overlay that has real fantastically detailed enamel. Same here, only in pink. Here we've got a mold blown piece with silver enamel and gilded. Kind of unusual. Here we've got a double overlay. The neat thing about this is it's a paperweight, thick, inlaid glass piece with internal decorations called sulfites. I won't go into that because that would take some time. Here we just have a really nice cut, polished piece. Neat thing is the photographic thumb lift, the old-fashioned camera, the tripoded camera. Here we've got an overlay. Unusual to find white over a different color. Real nice glass line, very unique. Here you've got a white overlay over cranberry. Here you've got a blue stained intaglio cut. The one on the left is a real 17th century or even 16th century enamel glass piece. It's from the Corning Glass Museum. Here, double overlay, wheel cut. This is just one of three of this size and magnitude that we know of in this country. Pewter overlay. Here's another one like the preceding one on the right, same size and shape. Always they come with large, well-decorated inlaid porcelain lids. Another 17th century style hysterismus piece from the late 19th century. And here's a third piece, like the other ones on the right. Again, the big inlay. No slouch. Pewter overlay. Double overlay with an absolutely magnificent lid. One on the left is a really nice overlay opaline. We talked before about overlays. Most of your overlays are done in transparent glass. This is done in translucent glass. Really hard to find. Then it's cut, polished, and enameled. Really great piece. Hard to find. Here we've got a ruby stained intaglio cut. And this is in the Mary Gregory style where you've got white enamel and just some color to the faces. Nice ruby stained wheel cut, very tall and slender. And here's a heavily cut glass line with a really nice way that they added the handle. The metal handle goes around with bands attached into the grooves of the body. Colored glass enameled, opaque. cobalt overlay, intaglium cut. I don't know if that's a double or a single overlay, I can't tell from back here. But the town scene in the front is copper wheel cut, and then there's gold set into the wheel cutting like I showed on the goblet with the eagle. Neat process. A white opaline, stone wheel grounded, faceted body. And that's it. Entertain any questions?
Manuel Steinhaus.